Right, so now we're going back to Byron with her topic today of what did Grandma know?
And what a terrific panel that was. Thank you all for that heartfelt and important discussion. I think one thing I would praise the pagan communities across the board for is that we're willing to talk about a lot of stuff that scares other people. But the other thing is sometimes we're not so good at listening to other people talk. So that was really good. Big appreciation for that. Well, I am going to fix my do rag and then I am going to tell y'all a bunch of stuff you probably already know. So, this is, I'm going to spend about an hour talking about the general principles and history of Appalachian folk magic and healing as I practice it. So, the caveat for that is that this is and has been for a long time an oral tradition. It usually passes down through families so that the way I do it and the way my family did it and the people in my cove did it may be somewhat different than the way you have experienced it or the way people in other places have. But I've done a lot of traveling teaching this in a lot of places in Appalachia, and the differences aren't great. But I mean, there are some differences that are interesting, and as I recall those, I will pass them on to you. I'm going to start with a poem. I had a poem in the middle last time. I have a poem in the beginning this time. And it's called Bone Sister. And y'all are going to know her. Some of y'all are going to know her. Here she comes again, looking like the twisted pages of a paperback trash novel. Yellow and sharp, but still some crumbly, too. Bone Sister rides a nice car. One of those sleek and silver Lexus things with black leather seats. The turn signals work good. She don't use them. She don't like people knowing which way she plans to go. Your way, my way, her own way, that is for sure no lie. Bone Sister wears a nice coat, a long black leather one. She got it at the fine thrift store downtown and it fits good, but she don't button it. She likes to feel the sharp wind on her ribs and the way the sides flap behind her as she goes. Your way, my way, her own way. That is for sure no lie. In the hill country, in the hard country, we call her Bone Sister. We call her White Mamaw. We call her Plum Kilt Woman. We call her, but she don't come till she wants to. I bet y'all have known her for a while. So, we're going to talk a little bit about rural poverty, but maybe not too much. I guess I'll start out by saying the reason I call this Hill Folks Hoodoo, which gets me in a lot of trouble for any of y'all that are on Facebook groups that are discussing each other's work and other people's work who aren't actually theirs work. I get a lot of flack for using the word hoodoo. I'm going to tell you this. I call it Hill Folks Hoodoo for two reasons. I call it Hill Folks because I don't like the word hillbilly. Now, if people in my culture refer to each other that way, I'm okay with that. So if I was to say to Don Donovan, oh, that is some hillbilly hat you got on, girl, I'd be liking that. That's one thing. But when somebody outside the culture uses that word, I know what they mean. And it's pejorative. They mean that my culture is less than their culture. That means that they can mock my culture with impunity, that they can look down on me and think badly of me simply because of where I'm from and the way I talk. So I don't use that word, and I don't like anybody using that word outside the culture. And if you use it in front of me and you happen to be from, oh, I don't know, Brooklyn or Montana or Texas, then I'm going to get ill with you. And that's just as simple as that's going to be. So that's why I use the word hill folks, because I didn't want to use mountaineer because, I don't know, I just didn't like it that much. So I use hill folks, and I use hoodoo because my cousin Dina and I, who grew up together, she used to do this little funny dance, and anytime something would come up about the family gifts, she would do this little dance and go, "Oh, it's that hoodoo that we do so well." So that's why I call it hoodoo, and that's why it's called Hill Folks Hoodoo. And its proper name is Appalachian Folk Magic. And beyond that, it doesn't have a name. So there are going to be plenty of people who are trying to sell you a book, probably one of my books, and they're going to call it Granny Magic or Granny Witchcraft. And I'm going to tell you why that's not what it's called, except by people outside of it that don't practice it. Because it's not all grannies, number one. And because an awful lot of people coming out of this culture would not ever use the word witch, and they would never use the word witchcraft. Because these practices, and I'll talk a little bit about the history of them, these practices come firmly out of a Protestant Christian tradition. And some of them are okay with the word witch, like Methodists are okay with that sometimes. Baptists are not okay with that at all. So if somebody says to you, "Oh, so what you really practice," as someone said to me one time, like I didn't know what I really practiced. Well, that's really called, it's not called Hill Folks Hoodoo. It's really called Appalachian Granny Magic. It's like, screw you, I practice it, I know what it's called, and it ain't called nothing. And that is the truth of the matter, that any folklore practice like this didn't have a name because it was just part of the culture. So you didn't go to the witch, or you didn't go to that woman in a little crazy dark house that lived under the bridge, and you called her a witch and she was going to practice witchcraft. You went to the healer in your community, and different healers did different things. So when I was coming up, women, of course, cotched all the babies and took care of all that woman's stuff. Men didn't do that. But when I was coming up, men were almost exclusively the water witches. They were the ones that were the dowsers. Now, I've talked to other people in other places, and they go, "No, no, where I was from, the women were always dowsers." So that's a little cultural difference depending on what part of Appalachia you grew up in, and depending on what part of the culture you come out of and what the influences were. So that's kind of where I am about what I call it and how I do it. I've been doing it obviously a long, long time. I've got 2 books out right now about it. The first one is Stobs and Ditchwater. The second one is Asphodity and Madstones. I've got a new one coming out in February next year from Llewellyn, and that is called Roots, Branches, and Spirits, the Folkways and Witchery of Appalachia. And that's got a lot more than just sort of magic and healing practices. It talks a lot about foodways and talks about music, and finishes up with a bunch of ghost stories, which I love to read and I love to tell, but I've never written any. So that new book is coming out, and it'll have ghost stories in it too. So look for that when it makes its appearance in February. So a lot of you are going to know what I'm talking about today because either you practice it, or there's somebody in your family that did it. A friend of mine contacted me yesterday and said she'd found out about a great-great-grandma who was said to be very powerful, and that furniture would move when she was in the room, and she was obviously a woman of great power. And so this has started my friend on a really deep ancestral quest to find out what it was her great-great-great-grandma knew. So I hope that this will remind you of things you knew before, or may trigger some memories for you of something when you were a child. But there is so much to say about this that I know what have I got, 45 minutes left. I'm just going to touch the tip of the iceberg. And I mean, Appalachian people the stereotype about storytelling is not a stereotype. We really do tell a lot of stories. And bless your hearts, if you hang on for the next 45 minutes, there's no telling what I'm going to tell you that you'll go, "Well, what did that have to do with anything?" but I'm hoping it'll at least be a decent enough story that'll keep your interest. So several years back, maybe 10 years back, I got invited up to a local college, and it's a Baptist college. And the teacher there, the instructor, was doing a class on women in magic. I mean, women in religion. And she, because I'm one of the founders of a goddess temple, she wanted me to come and talk about what that meant and the history and all of that. I was very happy to do that. So here I am with a big group of students, and over here on this side, they are, everybody's sleepy because it's first thing in the morning. They're making some notes and, and they're checking their phones and doing whatever. But the ones over on the other side are a bunch of, best I can tell you is, best description I can give you is, bunch of big old corn-fed boys. And it was obvious they were very local. I would bet that for a lot of them, like me, they were the first generation of their family to go to college. And they were stout, and they were unhappy about what I was talking about. It felt sinful and wrong and blasphemous, and they just didn't want to acknowledge it. They kept looking down like this, like the devil's come out of my eyes and jump on them. So bless their hearts. So I focused on this other group and told them about how the process of becoming a church and, all that kind of stuff. And then the teacher said, but now that's not all you do. You also do traditional folk healing. And I said, yes, I do. And then I lost that whole side over there. They were done because they weren't interested in any of that old country, that old weird country stuff. But these big old corn-fed boys over here perked up. And I started talking about the burn spell. I started talking about blowing fire out of a burn. I started talking about removing warts, and they all perked up. So the class was over, and the folks on this side filed out to go to their next class. And the big old corn-fed boys all came up around my table, and they said, my grandma used to do that, or I've got an aunt that does that. Have you heard about this thing? Have you heard about blackberry jelly? And they just spewed out all this extraordinarily rich and beautiful folklore that I bet they'd not had a chance to say to anybody on that campus the whole time they'd been there. So even though the religious piece of it made them terribly uncomfortable, the folkloric piece, the cultural piece, made them feel like there was someone there who was going to understand who they were and where they were coming from. So it is a deeply rooted set of practices in this culture. And in many instances, we have set that aside. And I'll tell you why. Because when people came out of these little hill subsistence farms and they came into town, and maybe they got a job that paid money in the mill, or they got some other kind of city job, they wanted to set aside all those old country ways because it made them feel lesser, and they felt some shame. A lot of people did it. A lot of people are still doing it. I'm going to tell you one more quick story. Being in California, and I was there for PantheaCon, and I was sitting in the lobby at this little table having coffee, and this young woman came up to me and she said, "Are you the Appalachian woman?" And I said, "Well, I'm an Appalachian woman, yes." And she said, "Well, can I sit down?" And so she sat down and she basically introduced me to the concept of the Appalachian diaspora, because we are everywhere. We are everywhere because living here has been so hard for so long. There are not opportunities, and people just get up and go. And sometimes the people I talk to in all of these places are the grandchildren of the people who out-migrated. And so they hold their grandparents' memory. They hold it like holding a physical object. And the the parents who got out of here, whew, they are so glad. Now they have a good job and a house with a good roof, and they got Wi-Fi that works all the time. They got all that stuff. But what they don't have is that sense of place that a lot of us carry with us all the time. A sense of place that we almost can't get away from. I've tried to leave here, I can't tell you how many times. And where's my sorry big behind? It's still in Western North Carolina. So we have this deep, I like to think of it as a gnarly connection to our roots here that a lot of people don't have. And some of it is because we are so connected here because it is hard. If it was easy, anybody could do it. But we stuck it out. And when people write books, and I'm not going to call the name of the book, but y'all probably know which one I'm talking about. When people write books that belittle this culture and continue to send it down as far as it can go, they do a disservice. I mean, we're broken in many ways, but they do the culture a disservice by mocking it and by making money mocking it, Jeff Foxworthy. So that's my sermon on Appalachia, and I'll throw more of it in as we go because I'm very passionate about it. About 100 years ago, a little bit more, some folks came into the Southern Highlands and they heard traditional ballads singing and traditional Appalachian music. And they realized that music was right out of the child collection out of Great Britain and had remained almost unchanged for hundreds of years since the migrations, which we'll get to in a minute, which will require a lot of waving of hands. So they called themselves song catchers, and some of y'all will have seen the movie or read the book about song catching. Well, what I've been really interested in is figuring out the roots of the folk magic. So I've been calling myself a spell catcher. And periodically, about every 2 or 3 years, I go over to Britain, to different parts of Britain, and do field research and talk to people on the ground that are also folk magicians. I was very lucky in Edinburgh to spend time with some collections that people had done over the years. So I've been doing, it is a good movie. So I've been doing a lot of that, spell catching where I can. So I'll share a little bit of that as I know about it too. But I want to talk, I guess I'm going to start with the burn spell. And the burn spell is one of those things that, no, I'm going to back up. I'm going to start with where this stuff comes from, and then we're going to get into the spell work. So in doing this field research and in doing this study and tracking things back, I have discovered that there are 3 main sources of the kind of folk magic we practice down here in the Southern Highlands. Maybe a little bit different where y'all, because you're up in Central. But I'm going to tell you what I know about this magic. And please forgive me, those of you who are hardcore Scots or hardcore Irish or hardcore English, because I know we get pretty tribal and territorial about that. But one of those 3 main influences is the British Isles and Ireland as one. The other is the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Dyche people. And the third primary influence down here, of course, is the Cherokee. Now, that's not to say there aren't other influences, and I'll get to some of that in a minute. But those are the big, big influences about this kind of magic. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the Scots-Irish, because I am one. There's a group of people. All right, hang on, because y'all have heard this before. There's a group of people called the Border Reivers, and they were the families that lived along the Anglo-Scots border and still do live along the Anglo-Scots border. So you can look them up, Border Reivers. There's several good books about them. And they lived in this no man's land between 2 powerful warring kingdoms. So when Edinburgh declared war on London, they tore through this no man's land. They burned everything. They killed people in their way. And the reverse was true. So when London declared war on Scotland, Off they went, tearing through there, burning fields, burning barns, all of that. So as a result, these people lived as their Celtic ancestors had lived for 1,000 years. They lived by raiding and stealing. They had no respect for any kind of government. They didn't have much respect for religion. They didn't trust either one of those. Certainly didn't trust either one of the governments that were bent on destroying their way of life. They only had faith of any kind in the leader, the head of their family, and the leader of their clan. And sometimes the head of the family and or the leader of a clan was also a woman, so they were much more egalitarian than we might give them credit for. But they also didn't understand the concept of the border, because it seemed to them they all were intermarried. They all knew each other, all related to each other. So I could be on one side of this invisible line, and Donna could be on the other side, and we could be second cousins twice removed. And so now we're at war. And we could just be standing there talking about, oh, I heard there was a new baby. Oh, yes, there's a new baby. It's a little girl. Blah. And then we would hear we'd hear a horse coming. And then we'd start fighting like maniacs. How dare you tread on my land, you filthy Scots maggot. And as soon as that fancy person rode away, then we'd go back to, well, are you coming to us for dinner on Sunday, or are we coming to you for dinner on Sunday? And then it just continued like that. So this put me in mind so strongly of my relatives in Madison County and Haywood County, because they're exactly the same way. They didn't trust anybody. You never called the law. All of that. Just like these border reivers. So here's what happened. Queen Elizabeth I died without heirs. And there was a big kerfluffle about who was going to rule the kingdom. And they ended up taking James VI of Scotland and cleaning up his act, because he was not who we think he is, and bringing him into England and uniting the kingdoms under James I. Now, he's the feller that brought us the King James Bible, that beautiful version that so many of us are familiar with. But he also united two kingdoms that had been at war and, frankly, continue to be at war to this very day, giving us, for the first time, the United Kingdom that we know. One of the first orders of business was to clear up these lawless rebels along the borderland, the border reivers. So they killed a bunch of them. Some of them became mercenaries on the continent. Some of them were sold into the Caribbean. And most of them, however, were pulled up by their filthy, scruffy little necks, and they were transplanted in the plantations of Ulster. So we tend to, unless we are Scots or Irish, we tend to think the Scots and Irish are an awful lot alike and they get along fine. But the reality is that's not necessarily the case, and this wasn't the case now. So these nominally Protestant Lowland Scots, Yorkshire folks were tossed into Ulster, which was still a fairly wild place. So the wild part worked, but the rest of it didn't. So after just a few generations, many of these people, who were now referred to as the Scots-Irish, the Scotch-Irish, which we also hear, and sometimes they're called the Ulster Scots, made the decision to leave the homeland that they'd not been in very long and to come to North America. A lot of them came in through the port of Philadelphia. And when they got to Pennsylvania, they encountered the second big influence on the folk magic, which are the Dutch people, the Pennsylvania Dutch. And I have likewise spent some time with those good, wonderful people. Shout out to Rob and Michelle and all of you good folks. And did some research with them there. So they stayed there not very long, the Scots-Irish people, but they learned a lot because the Dutch people were like them. There were transplants and immigrants who had left their home. But unlike them, the Dutch people really were settled farmers. And these folks had never really been farmers in any real sense of the word. So they kept going across Pennsylvania. They took, I like to think of it as a hard left, and they went down the valley of the Shenandoah. And then they peeled off at different places along that long, long valley. And then my people ended up here in the fastnesses of the Southern Highlands. And there they encountered probably the first real civilization they'd ever known, and that was the Empire of the Cherokee. Because by that time, and we're talking about pretty much the early 1700s, the Cherokee were a settled empire. They had pretty much conquered all the other small tribes or absorbed them. And they had a written language. They had a deeply evolved spiritual practice and deeply evolved economy and political culture. They were referred to as at the time as a civilized tribe, which means they had all the stuff that white Europeans understood to bring civilization. Now, I don't want to imply in any way that there were not enslaved people here, because there were. Unlike the rich plantation lands south and east of us, there was not critical mass, though, of enslaved African people. So there wasn't enough to have a really big impact on the folk magic like you will see down in Gullah Geechee country, down throughout the low country, down through Savannah and all the way down. So I don't want to imply, I don't want to whitewash that, because there were slaves here. And the Cherokee, I believe, kept slaves too. But there's just not a big influence on the folk magic where we are. The biggest influence really was the Scots-Irish stuff and the English stuff, some little bit of German, and the Cherokee. And they lived together pretty peaceably for a while before the removals, and shared a lot of information like people do, so that even now among the Cherokee on Qualla boundary, you're going to hear Scottish names and Irish names, because there was a lot of intermarriage, and still is, actually. So those are the big influences on what it is we do. And what it is we do is healing in as many modalities as we can manage. And we do folk psychology, I guess, too. Because some of the stuff I'm about to tell you about, it works, but it doesn't work why we think it works. And I'm going to start, I said I was going to start with a burn spell, but I'm not. I'm going to start with catnip. So when I was a child, it was believed in the cove that I grew up in, that when a baby was born, if you did not feed it catnip tea, then hives would break out on the inside of the baby's body, and the baby would die. So everybody fed their babies catnip tea. Everybody, because nobody wants your baby to die from inside hives. Well, hives won't break out on the inside of your body, period. They won't. But catnip tea is a soporific. So if you have a fussy little baby and you've got an exhausted mama and tensions are getting higher and nobody is sleeping very well, and those of you who are mamas know exactly what I'm talking about, then this calming tea does two things. Because the baby gets it like on a little dummy, like there's some fabric that dips in tea and you squirt it in the baby's mouth so you can drink it. Or maybe the baby gets it on the edge of a spoon a little bit. So the mama is doing all that. The mama has the baby in close physical contact, which was not always true on these subsistence farms, because there was just so much work to do. So she's got the baby close to her body. There's good body contact. And in between giving the baby little drops, she's having some drops. So everybody starts to calm down just a little bit. calm down. And the mama's milk comes in better, probably, because she's less stressed out. They've got that wonderful physical contact. And everything just relaxes a little bit. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with hives, but it has everything to do with the nature of that particular herb, catnip, which calms people down. So that's an example of the kinds of things that people did, and it worked, but it didn't necessarily work the way for the reason we thought it would work. Another one is the silver dime, a mercury dime. And when I was coming up, you would find those, and we had one in our community with a hole drilled through it and a little string around it. And it was believed that the silver dime would help when a baby was teething. Now, we know now that silver, actual silver, does help with a variety of things. But I don't know that this ever helped except psychologically, because the cry would go up as soon as some poor little teething young'un started screaming. The cry would go out up through the holler. Who's got the dime? Who's got the dime? And it would get pulled out of a drawer somewhere, probably a kitchen drawer, and it'd go around the baby's neck. And I swear to you, I don't think the string ever got changed. I remember seeing it when I was about maybe 9 or 10 years old on a little cousin, and that was just the nastiest little string you ever saw. But it helped. They believed it helped every single time. And I'm going to tell you a tiny backstory to that, or a tiny side story. So look out, we're going down a rabbit hole. So I was in Kansas at a festival, and I was telling the story of the silver dime with a hole in it, and this woman in front of me she burst into tears, and she couldn't stop. She was wiping her eyes, and she was wiping her eyes with her shirt. She was doing all this stuff, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she just went. So I just kept going, and as it turned out, her grandmother was from West Virginia, and when her grandmother died, all the family came in and just basically like vultures and cleared out her house so that there was just nothing left. And this woman and her grandmother had been very close. And I mean, she didn't want the furniture or any of the valuables. She just wanted something to remember her grandmother by. So one of the people who'd cleared out the house said, well, there is something left. I mean, if you think you could work, you would like to have that. We've got her old spice rack. And this woman said, yes, I will take that. So she got this little old wooden spice rack, and I know y'all have seen them places. And in the bottom were 2 drawers. So she was thrilled to have this spice rack because her grandmother had taught her how to cook. So that had special meaning for her. And she was feeling like, you know, y'all have all the rest of that. I've got the thing that really matters to me. And then she opened the little drawers. And in one of the drawers was a handwritten recipe from her grandmother. And it was something that her grandmother had taught her to cook. So that was so beautiful. She just couldn't believe it. The other little drawer had a silver dime in it with a hole in it. But she didn't know what that was for. She didn't have any idea at all. So here I am doing my shtick about Appalachian folk magic, and she suddenly knew what that dime was for. And it made that whole thing complete for her. So when you want to know more about what your family did, I'm going to give you some advice. Don't ever use the word witch or witchcraft. Talk to them about, what is that weird stuff our family used to do? You know, when they lived out in the country, when they lived out on the home place or at the farm, what are those things that they did? And you'll be surprised at the stories they'll tell you. And they'll tell it to you like, well, this is the weirdest thing you ever heard, but this is what they did. And then they will tell you something, and chances are you'll be able to look at that and immediately go, oh, well, that's just witchcraft. That's just magic. I understand what that is. And an example of that is this, and some of y'all will have seen that in the kitchen at the home place, maybe. You may even have one in your kitchen at home now. And it's a mason jar that is no longer good for canning. It's maybe got a chip out of the top or a little crack or something. and it's in the window, and in it are all manner of pieces of broken colored glass. And whoever's kitchen that belongs to will say to you, well, I mean, you can't leave that out in the yard because the kids they'll get cut on it or somebody get bad hurt. So I just pick it up. I just put it in there. I didn't know what else to do with it. And my mama used to have one of those too. But it's pretty, isn't it? Look how the way the sun comes through that green glass from that 7-Up bottle. Isn't that pretty? It's like stained glass in a church, isn't it? Well, I'm gonna tell you where that comes from. That is a protective device to keep baleful land spirits from coming in your house and messing stuff up. And it's a Scottish tradition. And they did that because these little mischievous spirits, it was believed that they could not go past edges without stopping to count them. So if you've got all these little broken pieces of glass with all these different edges, they have to stop in the window of the kitchen, the heart of your home. They've to stop there, and they've got to count all the edges. And here's the big secret, though. They're not good at counting. So they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 14, 17, 3, 2, and so they never finish counting, and sooner or later they give up and go away. So that is an old folk tradition that came out of the British Isles and is practiced today, but people don't know why they do it. They just know that it makes sense and that maybe their mama or their grandma did it. Now the burn spell, I'm finally going to get to the burn spell. The burn spell changes depending on where you are. So the way I learned it was like this. Come 3 angels from the north, take both fire and frost. And you say it 3 times while running your hand above where the burned place is, clockwise with the sun. And you say it 3 times. Come 3 angels from the north, take both fire and frost. So I teach it like that. Then I was in northern West Virginia, and a friend of mine up there said, oh, well, that's interesting. We say it as come 3 brides from the north, take the fire and leave the frost. Oh, well, that's interesting. So many places where I have taught this in Appalachia, people will come and go, oh, but now, no, we have that, but this is what we say. So you can see that these things change from place to place, but the idea of it, of removing the heat from the burn, is something that is universal. But here's an interesting tracking thing that I'm not sure about yet, but I've got it in my notebook to figure out more about. So at the point where it switches from being angels to brides, then we have to look at the bride, which is another name for Bridget. So does this, in fact, go all the way back to Saint Bridget and possibly to the goddess Bridget as a charm of healing for a burn, because Bridget, as saint and goddess, has control over healing. So it may go all the way back, way beyond where we had been. Isn't that interesting? 3 ladies, yep. Donna says brides, yep. So much of this stuff comes right down to us, and some of it, I'm checking my time, some of it seems to just travel along family lines, and it's not about saying words, and it's not about using herbs. It is about something, it's about a deep knowing that some of us have. That seems to come down a lot in Scots-Irish people. And I'm going to tell you, oh yeah, I'll do that, the blood verse in just a minute. But that last part isn't accurate anymore. I'm going to tell you why that is too. Lucinda, remind me if I don't talk about that to bring it up. I'll just talk about it now. Is that all right? Are y'all okay with that? So there is a verse in the Bible, in Ezekiel, that is supposed to stop a flow of blood. And it does. It does. And I can call that verse for you, but I think most of you probably know. So the Ezekiel verse was something that my grandfather did. Now, he was my step grandfather, so not a blood relation, but he was my grandfather nonetheless. And anytime somebody in the family got a cut, a terrible cut, they would call him and he would say, "Tell me your full name." And then he would repeat this verse and the flow of blood would stop. Well, what I have learned as an unchurched person who practices this craft is that some of the superstitions that come down to us about it are just that. They are just superstitions. So we have been told that certain things have to pass male, female, or else they are lost. And I'm here to tell you that for the most part, that is not true. So you can learn to stop a flow of blood, either with the verse or without, because all of this is about your connection to the earth and your use of earth energies to do the work. I know that may be hard to understand, but it's not about the male female thing. It's not at all. And I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm likely to think that's a Protestant thing where somebody had to be bigger and smarter and fancier than somebody else. But it doesn't have to be that way. And here's what happened for me is that I was up in Delaware visiting some friends, and I got to go to the New Alexandrian Library. And they were very kind to me. They had a new sign. They kind of cleared the pathway so that I could walk in like a little queen and look at this beautiful library. Well, when I walked in like a queen to the library, there was a fella who had a bloody nose, and he was just like this. And so I did the blood, the stopping blood, and that worked. Well, I've also done it on women too. That's your family's version, Brenda. I get that. Yeah. Some people. All right, Joseph, ask me that in just a minute, okay? So we think this comes down through the family lines, and certainly when I was 7, 8 years old, maybe a little older, they told me that when I became a woman, when I started bleeding, that I would be given a gift, and it was going to be something that one of my relatives already showed. I mean, they already did, so I would know what they were. So it would be wart removal, hands-on healing, overlooking, precognitive dreaming, all that stuff. And I had a young woman come in to get a tarot reading from me one day, and I said, like I always do, "So what can I do for you today?" And she sat down and she said, "You can tell me whether or not I'm crazy." And so this young woman, and you take one look at her, she's got that milky white skin like this, and she had that kind of strawberry blonde hair. And I said, "Well, that's kind of beyond my pay grade, but you want to tell me what's going on?" She said, "Well, I have dreams that come true. I can put my hands on a sick animal and heal it. And I know things I shouldn't know, and I hear dead people's voices talking to me." And I said, oh, honey, I don't know if you're crazy, but I'm going to guess you're Scots-Irish. So where are your people from? And she said, McDowell County. And I said, well, before McDowell County, where were they from? And she said, oh, my people are all Scotch-Irish. So she had all of those profoundly helpful and beautiful gifts, but she had been told over and over again that they were a pathway to sin and a doorway to Satan, and she was in danger if she practiced any of them. So that's something that as communities, and especially as magical communities in Appalachia, that it will be a good thing for us to be able to model how it is you use those skills that have come down to you, if you have those, and how we can express to people who may be deeply layered in one of those fiercely Protestant traditions that what they do does not make them crazy, and it does not make them dangerous, and it does not put them in danger. It is skills that have come down to them from their ancestors, and they are valuable skills. My daughter had warts. My gift is not removing warts. So I couldn't do anything. We did all the over-the-counter stuff. We did all the other stuff. We did the duct tape and the aspirin. We did it all. I took her to a dermatologist, had the warts removed. They all came back. Finally, she was in college up at App State in Boone. And she went to, the school nurse person about something totally different. And the nurse noticed her warts. And she said, "Oh, you want to get rid of those?" And my daughter was like, "Yes, I'd love to get rid of them, but I've had them for years. We can't." And the woman laughed and she said, "Well, my great aunt, she could. Well, my great aunt could too." And she would do this thing where you came to her and you had a wart, and she would hold your hand. Let's say the wart was on your hand here. She'd hold your hand. She'd rub it with her thumb, and she would go, "Oh, honey, I don't know why people come to me about this. I do not have any power over this at all, but it is so good to see you. How's your daddy doing? Are his feet better?" She'd have this whole conversation, and then you'd go away, and she'd probably send you with a piece of cake home, and then 3 days later, the warts would fall off. Now, we don't know if there was something in the chemical balance of her oils of her skin that removed the warts. We don't know why. We just know that it did happen. I didn't get that. So the school nurse said, yeah, that's something. It does happen in some families, but I don't know anybody that doesn't. And she said, "But have you tried bloodroot tincture?" So that is the other side of Appalachian folk healing, is that if you don't have somebody who can rub that wart off or will buy that wart from you or whatever, you can make, or I guess you can buy, bloodroot tincture, and that will remove it. And that's what removed my daughter's warts, I believe, forever and ever and ever. All right, let me check. Joseph, what was your question? That sounds, milquetoast sounds exactly right. And I am guessing it's German. It feels German. It feels like a Deutsch thing. But I tell you what I'll do. I will contact my Deutsch friends and see what they know about that. And then I'll post something on this page. Would that be helpful, do you think?
That'll be perfectly helpful.
I love watching him talking, not hearing him.
That's okay. I'm just
little
about
Hungarian. What?
I said I'm just about 30 seconds away. It has to reestablish the connection with the mall. What about teapots?
Yeah, buying warts is a big thing. Okay, I'm going to wait for you to speak. I love that you gesture, though.
What about teapots?
What about teapots?
Always keeping a teapot with water on the stove. Always have to have a silver teapot in the house, or silver always being kept in the house.
Oh, that's interesting. What part of Appalachia are your people from?
My original people are from the New River Gorge area, but my family is neither Scotch nor Irish. We're actually Romney.
Oh, well, yeah, no, because I was going to say a silver teapot doesn't sound right, but that's definitely a Roma thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. All right, let's see. What else do I want to tell you all about? So if you want to know more and more and more about all this stuff, you can read books. And of course, I am going to always tell you to get my books. But you can also just talk to people. But what will not help you is if you go up to traditional people and you say, "Would you tell me all about Appalachian folk magic?" Or, "I really want to know about this hill folks hoodoo," or any of that stuff, because you're not going to get any response that is helpful at all, because they will shut down. Donna just said something about hospitality, and that's a huge thing for us. And I'm going to say this in general about hospitality. I think it's the only commonality that all the world's religions have, because they keep saying, "Oh, it's the golden rule. It's the golden rule." Well, I don't have no golden rule where I'm from. I don't. But I do have the notion that you welcome in the stranger. And the thing about that is it's biologically based. So if you have your kind of clan family and you're all more or less related to each other, um, getting some new blood in there to marry into the family or at least bring some new DNA into the family is a good thing. So hospitality always, everywhere is important. And we would do well to remember that. There was a time when hospitality was the law of the land just about everywhere. But we are seeing less and less and less of that, and fewer people that feel safe enough to really practice it. Um,
We've had you a couple times, and we had you for the last one. And this one, will you please tell us about your 3 books?
I guess I should do that, huh?
Yeah, and what lectures you're giving, or anything else you're doing.
Well, I'm doing a class, 2 classes for Witch Lab. They're in Columbus, Ohio, I think. Those are going to be online. One is next weekend and one is in September. Even as we speak, through the power of the interwebs, I am also teaching on the West Coast at Fairy Worlds. I'm teaching how to step across the boundaries and into the realms. So look for me doing different classes on at festivals and conferences online. I'm about to offer, I was kind of waiting to see if COVID was going to stick. I'm about to offer my online Appalachian Folk Magic class, my Hill Folks Hoodoo class, which lasts about, I don't know, I'd like to say 6 weeks, but then we get into it and it goes on for 8 weeks, and sometimes it goes on for 10 weeks. But look for that on Facebook. You can reach me at Facebook. I'm Byron Ballard, but I'm also Village Witch A Wanderin', which is my professional page. You can find me on Instagram, Byron Ballard, and on Twitter, Byron Ballard. You can find me, send me email at my website at info@myvillagewitch.com. I have 4 books currently. 2 are on Appalachian folk magic, Staubs and Ditchwater, or as I like to say, Staubs and Ditchwater. And the funny thing about that is that I spelled Staubs the way I pronounce it, which really isn't the way it's spelled at all, but Staubs, Staubs and Ditchwater. The second one is Asphodity and Madstones, and that has a lot more herbal stuff in it. So if you're really into the herbs, herbal healing and magic, the second one is going to have more of that in it. My third book is called Embracing Willendorf, and it's about loving your body and getting healthy, which, you know, most of us in Appalachia could stand to do. And my fourth book is Earthworks, Ceremonies in Tower Time. And that is about, it's the first part of it are essays about where we are culturally, politically, spiritually, and how we can thrive in these times. And the second half of the book is all ceremonies and rituals that you can do. I have another folk magic book coming out from Llewellyn, like I said, in February, which is Roots, Branches, and Spirits. And then next late spring, early summer, I have a book from that's coming from Red Wheel Wiser that's on animism. And right now it's animism and permaculture and the deepening of your spirituality by deeply connecting to the earth. That at this point doesn't have a name, but we've been calling it the Book of Days. So that's 2 more books next year. And I'm working on a book now that I would love all of y'all's help with that is called The Ragged Wound, Tending the Soul of Appalachia. And that is not a magical book. That's looking at what is wrong with our region and figuring out how we come together collectively and fix it and not wait on the ARC to do it or wait on a governor to do it, but we do it ourselves. So if y'all have ideas on that, send that to me in the email, info@myvillagewitch.com.
Right. And
yes. Any more questions? Donna, you making me you sending dirty phone calls to me? What?
And I'm going to go ahead and share out your link to all our destinations.
Thank you. And thanks, Brenda.
what would you like? What would you like out of that? Are you looking for emails of stories of the communities and what's happening, ideas to fix it?
Here's what I think the problem is. I mean, yes, there's a problem with the economy. There's a problem with leadership on the state level and regional level, all of that. We have been under the thumbs of people who don't give a damn about the people of Appalachia for far too long. And we have been trusting that somebody from outside the region is going to come in and fix it, and they just aren't. They are not going to fix it. If it's going to get fixed, if we're going to address, really seriously address the opioid problems and not depend on people working themselves to death like Donna Donovan does to get that solved, we're going to have to take it on. I mean, really take it on. And I believe, in spite of what all these problems look like, I think it's a spiritual problem. I think we have lost contact with the mountains, and I think we have lost contact. However you define God, we have lost it. And we are expecting God to fix us, and God ain't going to fix us. Because, as y'all know, here I go. I'm going to quote some scripture for you. The Lord helps those that help themselves. See, lightning didn't strike. We're good.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but I love that one because it doesn't define whose kingdom you're dealing with.
Mm-mm. Not at all. And that is the big thing I've found out again and again in practicing this. Mama Star, and some of y'all know Mama Star. I was going on her podcast one time, and she had booked, somebody had booked me. I don't think she had. And she called me up and she said, well, are you Christian? And I said, no. And she said, well, then you can't practice what you practice. I said, well, you should have probably told me that 45 goddamn years ago, so I wouldn't be doing it. And she just laughed. You know, to her credit, she just laughed. It was good.
Yeah.
So that's what I've learned, that this is all about energy, and it's about this place. These are some of the oldest mountains in the world, and two of the oldest rivers in the world run through here, the New River and the French Broad. This is old, deep stuff, and we need to tap into it. We need to be part of it. We need to use it.
And we need to capture it. Because
we need to let it flow through us and do the healing that we need.
Right.
Our people, we need more than another polluting industry that's going to give us the kind of jobs that kill us.
And we need something more than a mind boss and mind boss mentality.
Absolutely. And that is going to require us healing ourselves and our families. And man, it is so much easier to walk around with my big old giant pentacle and say who I am and what I do than it is to talk to my hurtful family and go, you're wrong. You're just wrong. And you're killing yourselves. So it's hard work. And again, like I said earlier today, it's hard work and it's going to take courage to get it done. But if we're looking not at this generation, not at the one that comes after, but the third and the fourth and the fifth and on down, if we are going to have healthy people in Appalachia, we're going to have to take it on. Nobody's going to save us.
Yeah. And we're going to have to go back to the mountains.
That's right. Tag, we're it.
Well, thank you, darling, for doing both classes.
Thank you. And thank you all so much. I had such a good time. Donna, I miss you like crazy cakes. She and I would have already been at 3 festivals together by now. All right. Love y'all. info@myvillagewitch.com. If you know how it is, we're going to save the region.
Yep.
Thank y'all. Have a great rest of your fest. Bye.
All right.